Hi, this video gives you an overview about the basic features of SpecLog, just enough to help you getting started. First, I want to show you what a repository is. Repository is the place where SpecLog stores the requirements. You can create a new repository, which could be either a local repository or a shared repository. A local repository is a single file stored on the file system, and the shared repository would be a repository that is published on a server and can be shared between different clients, so different SpecLog users can work on the same set of requirements at the same time. You can specify a language for a repository which will have an influence of how search works in the repository and how Gherkin files that you can link to requirements in the repository are interpreted. When you create a new repository, it will be empty. The repository will define a set of card templates, which are basically types of requirements which you can capture in your repository. You can easily change the type of card templates or the card templates and type of requirements that you want to have in your repository. Requirements are listed in the so-called requirements tool widget. So the requirements tool widget is this window here where you can see all the requirements that are existing already in the repository, and as you can see, this is empty right now. So I'll just create a new user story by dragging a new requirement here from the new requirement tool widget on the workspace, and as you can see here, the requirement appears also in the list of requirements in the requirement tool widget. And I'll just define a goal, and as you can see, this updates synchronously. Now what I've done here is I created a new requirement by dragging it on the surface, the workspace. And the workspace is a second concept that is supported by SpecLog. A workspace is basically an infinite wall which you can use to map requirements, arrange them in different ways like story maps. To see what kind of workspaces you have in a repository, you can open here the workspaces tool widget, and by default there is a workspace 1 which I can rename to my story map, for example. And there is another tool widget which is the navigator, which you can use to navigate on this workspace. And basically, as you can see, this is an infinite surface. You can move around dragging this rectangle in the navigator. You can also move around by dragging the surface, and you can zoom in and zoom out the workspace to get a better overview or see more details of the story map. Now, removing a requirement from the workspace doesn't remove it from the repository. So if I click here, I remove the requirement from the workspace. It's still in the repository, and I can drag it here again in order to have it back on this workspace. If I have multiple requirements on the workspace, I can also put them into relation to each other. So let's say I want to make a refinement of searching for books, like search for books by title. Now I can also say this is a refinement of this user story, and this means that if you look into the details of this requirement, you will see in the detailed view of the requirement that user story 2 is linked as a refinement of user story 1. User story 1 is linked as a parent for has linked user story 1 as a parent. In SpecLog you have tabs which can either show a workspace or the details of a requirement, or they can also display a list of requirements where you can search separately. If you go here in the requirements tool widget and say new list, this will open a new tab which is a requirements list where you can search, like for search, and you will see all user stories mapping this search string, and you can navigate to the detail. Here you see details. You can sort in different after different attributes. You can define what kind of columns you want to see here, and you can also define advanced searches like searching for specific parts, searching in specific parts of the requirement. What you can also see here is the search string that is composed out of that, and you can use the same syntax which you see here in the requirement tool widget which we saw before, and use this as well for searching. Since we have a relationship between requirements defined, you can also view this relationship here in the tool widgets showing the refinement tree. This switches the view where you see different types of requirements, like in this case user stories, and you see that user story 1 is below user story 2 is below user story 1. So if I add another user story here, you'll see it appears here on this top level of user story roots. If I make it, for example, user story 3 a refinement of user story 2, then it will appear down here. You can break relations by opening the detail view of a requirement and removing the association here. You can also have multiple parents for a refinement, like in this case. In this case you would see the refinement under both user story nodes. Since you can also synchronize requirements into work item tracking systems like Team Foundation Server, work items, or Jira tickets, you which sometimes cannot have, so TFS for example cannot have multiple parents for a work item. You can define what is the primary parent of your user story, and this will be then synchronized into the work item tracking system as the parent, while the other relation will be just synchronized as a simple relation. Another interesting concept in SpecLog is tags. Tags allow you to tag your requirements. One way of using and applying tags is just displaying them here in the requirements tool widget and writing a tag name here, and you can apply the tags like this, and you will see here on the workspace that this tag has been applied, and you can also view the tags here and extend them further here, or remove tags. Tags are useful for all kinds of organizing your requirements, like you can search for it with tags colon and enter the tag name, which will show you all the requirements matching that tag, and it will also visualize what kind of requirements have been matched on this workspace. You can also drag out multiple requirements into a workspace. So if I would create now a new workspace, like new workspace sprint 1, and search for all requirements that have been tagged for sprint 1, I could move them here and have them placed on the workspace. You can also check which requirements are mapped on which workspace. So I could say on this story map workspace, I want to see all requirements that have the tag sprint1 but are not tagged on the workspace sprint1. And I could basically use that in order to add stories to my workspace that I have planned for sprint 1 but not arranged yet on sprint 1 workspace. Another thing that is useful to know is that you can mark requirements on the workspace either by right mouse clicking them individually or by dragging a rectangular with a right click with the mouse, which you can then use to move individual requirements groups on the workspace. And you can also use that in order to you can also drag and drop requirements to another workspace in order to either move them or copy them to another workspace. Switching between moving and copying is achieved by pressing the Control key. Another thing you can do is look into the details of a requirement. So if you open the requirement details, you will first of all see all the tags that have been attached to this requirement, the relations, as well as the workspaces this requirement has been mapped to. The number 2 here indicates that this requirement is actually mapped twice on the sprint 1 workspace, so this is probably something you want to change. You can remove the mapping from a workspace by just clicking here. So now user story 2 is not anymore on the sprint 1 workspace. And you can also directly navigate to the workspace and the location where a requirement is mapped by clicking here. Another thing you can do in the detail of a requirement is defining acceptance criteria. You can either press Ctrl N or this button, Add Criterion, and write acceptance criteria title, which will become the scenario title of a Gherkin feature file if you later export this this acceptance criteria to a Gherkin file. And here you can start drafting your examples and ideas. Ultimately, this will turn out into a given, when, then scenario, which would describe and illustrate how an acceptance criteria work. Anyway, the idea is not to start writing given, then, but rather capturing ideas about things you find out about this requirement, like sketches, UI mockups, and other notes you are collecting as you're refining further things to the requirement. You can attach UI mockups, like the UI mockup I have prepared here, by copy pasting them or attaching them as a file. You can also remove the attachment here again. And you can also attach other types of files. Also interesting to know is that you can, in the body format, using rich text, either through shortcuts or through this toolbar. And also useful to know is that you can also create links to other requirements. Like in this case, I make a link to user story 2, user story 1, which is navigable. So I can open it here. You can edit and modify this link by pressing Ctrl K or here to basically define the caption and the navigation target. This can be also hyperlinks to HTTP, like see www.speclog.net for further information, and you can create a hyperlink for this as well, which would be then navigated with the browser. When you have finished collecting your requirements or your acceptance criteria for a user story, you can also save the user story as Gherkin file, which will convert the acceptance criteria into an outline feature file that you can link to your requirement, which I will do here right now. And you can see that this is immediately translated into the Gherkin syntax. So if you look at the source code of this feature file, you can see that the template and of the user story, as well as the acceptance criteria, has been exported into this feature file, and basically you can modify it as you wish. So developers can continue to refine the feature files, and the changes will be synchronized back to your repository. It will take some time now until SpecLog will recognize that this feature file has been updated, but after some time you will see the changes reflected here. The idea is, once requirements have been transformed into a feature file, you will review your original nodes by splitting that view and comparing them with what has been, and you see now this has been updated, and compare it with what you have discussed, and if you still agree what has been refined during writing the feature file and implementing that feature, you can remove these planning nodes or these initial nodes from your SpecLog, as they are now linked with the source control system, version controlled feature files, and your automatically validated documentation. Still, other artifacts can be kept in SpecLog, so you have a combination of feature files, details, and screens and automated executable specifications. You can also remove the links of a feature file again and link something else to this story. Finally, you can also export your repository into HTML. You will see that you have a nice rendering of all the detail you had, and you can also search this HTML file and find requirements and navigate between different requirements.